Most families brought old recipes to Thanksgiving. Mine brought old judgments. By the time the turkey hit the table, my father had already decided what I was in front of everyone: the daughter who still rented, the daughter who never quite became anything worth bragging about. My sister, Celeste, was the one he spoke about with pride. I was the one he spoke over. And the worst part was, nobody at that table looked surprised. They just lowered their eyes, reached for the rolls, and let him do what he had done my whole life: make me smaller so someone else could look bigger. But being underestimated for long enough does something dangerous. It teaches you how to build in silence. My name is Corinne Vale Mercer, and on the Thanksgiving night my father called me unfinished. He had no idea he was speaking from inside a life he had spent years refusing to see. By 3 o'clock on Thanksgiving afternoon, my condo in South End smelt like brown sugar, cinnamon, and roasted sweet potatoes. The casserole dish sat on a folded kitchen towel while I spooned the pecan topping across the surface and smoothed it into place with the back of a spoon. The kitchen was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the low click of the baseboard heater kicking on. My laptop was shut on the dining table beside a neat stack of mail, two utility bills clipped together, and a maintenance calendar for the condo association I kept because I liked knowing when things would be serviced before they broke. Nothing in my place was fancy. Nothing needed to be. The cabinets were painted a warm white, the counters were clean, the dish rack was empty, and the kind of order I had built for myself rested over everything like a second skin. If you walked in without knowing me, you would think a woman who paid attention lived there. Maybe a teacher, maybe an accountant. Definitely not the person my father still imagined when he talked about me to other people. I checked the oven, pulled the casserole out, and set it on the stove to cool. The recipe was my grandmother Daphne Mercer's: brown butter, sweet potatoes, pecans, and just enough salt to keep it from becoming dessert. She used to say that if you knew how to season food properly, you knew how to pay attention. And if you knew how to pay attention, you could build a life that lasted. She was the only person in my family who ever looked at me and saw something worth building. I rinsed my hands, dried them, and caught my reflection in the dark microwave door. Navy sweater, jeans, hair pulled back, small gold hoops, nothing dramatic. I looked exactly how I always looked, like someone who had learned years ago that being overlooked had one practical advantage: people stopped checking what you were capable of. That part had started early. Growing up, the framed photo in the middle of the living room wall was always Celeste: her cheer uniform, her graduation portrait, her engagement picture. Whatever version of her was shining brightest at the time. My photo was once left in a desk drawer for 11 months because my mother hadn't found the right place for it yet. When I got my first promotion in my 20s and brought the news home, my father didn't ask what I had done to earn it. He looked at me over his plate and asked if it came with real money or just more responsibility. My mother turned the conversation to Celeste before my answer was finished. She had gotten very good at that over the years, shifting attention like a woman redirecting traffic around an accident. At family gatherings, my father always introduced my sister first. "This is Celeste. She's doing great in real estate." Then, after the applause in his voice had been spent, he would add, "And this is Corinne." No title, no proud adjective, just my name, like an afterthought nobody meant to leave out. Every Thanksgiving, I told myself maybe this year would be different. Maybe my father would ask how I was and wait for the answer. Maybe my mother would say my name without immediately attaching my sisters to it. Maybe dinner would feel like dinner instead of an annual performance where everyone already knew their lines. Every year, I was wrong. My phone lit up on the counter just as I reached for my keys. Carter Vale Property Management. November collection summary for Blue Hollow Residential, LLC. I opened it on instinct, thumb moving across the screen with the same automatic motion I used every evening before bed. Green check marks lined the page. Paid, 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 paid. I paused at one entry in the middle, not long enough to count, just long enough to feel that familiar twist of irony settle under my ribs. Then I locked the screen and slipped the phone into my coat pocket. I picked up the casserole, my keys, and a bottle of wine I knew nobody would open because my father preferred to carve a turkey as if he were conducting a hearing, not a holiday. Outside, the late November cold had that first sharp edge winter gets in North Carolina, when the sun is still bright but no longer warm. I loaded the dish into the passenger seat of my Subaru Outback and pulled onto Tryon, heading east. By the time I merged toward Independence, the radio was murmuring through a pre-game football show, two men arguing cheerfully about a spread I wasn't listening to. Traffic thickened near the exits, and the suburbs beyond Charlotte had already started to glow. Porch lights, brake lights, inflatable turkeys on lawns, the ordinary theater of other people's family rituals. My parents had sold their ranch in Matthews 2 years earlier. After my father got pushed into retirement, he insisted on calling voluntary. They lived now in a 2-bedroom apartment in East Charlotte, a clean brick building with decent parking, a lobby that always smelled faintly of floor polish and old heat, and a front door that stuck when the weather turned cold. I knew that because the maintenance ticket hit the owner report the week before. I approved the repair, then went about my day. When I parked, the lot was already crowded. I carried the casserole up the walkway and pulled the lobby door open with the extra half tug it needed. Inside, the heat hit me first, then the quiet hum of the building, a television somewhere down the hall, a child laughing through a wall, the soft mechanical sigh of the elevator doors opening and closing. Ordinary sounds, good sounds, the kind tenants deserved. My parents were on the second floor. The apartment door was unlocked, of course. It always was on holidays, like we were still living in a neighborhood where everyone knew everyone, and no one had to prove they belonged. The first thing I saw when I stepped inside was my father at the head of the old Matthews dining table, even though dinner was at least 20 minutes away. He sat there like the room had been built around him and not the other way around. The table barely fit in the apartment. Its edges crowded the dining area, forcing everyone to turn sideways to get past, but he would rather lose walking space than surrender the head of the table. My mother moved between the stove and the counter with the dish towel over her shoulder, checking pans that didn't need checking. Celeste looked up from the charcuterie board she had arranged on the kitchen island and gave me the bright, practiced smile she used in listing photos. "You made it! I've been here since 9, helping Mom." "Of course you have." My father glanced at the clock before he looked at me. "Traffic that bad, Corinne?" "Not really." I set the casserole on the counter. "Just Charlotte on Thanksgiving." My mother took the dish and peeked under the foil. "You didn't have to bring so much." "I always bring this." She nodded like that was weather, not history. Owen stood near the counter with a tumbler of whiskey in one hand, shoulders already tight under a quarter zip. He gave me a small nod. Across the room, Aunt Bertie and Uncle Thomas arrived carrying a boxed pecan pie from a bakery in Plaza Midwood, and Bertie touched my wrist as she passed in the narrow space between the table and the wall. It was nothing, it was everything. When we finally sat down, I took the seat by the kitchen door, my seat, the one I had been slipping into for years without anyone assigning it anymore. My father carved, plates moved, silverware scraped. Then, right on cue, he turned to Celeste first. "So, tell everyone about the townhouse in South Park." Celeste straightened, pleased. She started talking about curb appeal, staging, school district, kitchen finishes, open house traffic. I cut a piece of turkey and listened to her carefully avoid words like reserves, rate reset, carrying cost, cash flow. Owen drank more quickly than the story required. Aunt Bertie looked at me once, then back down to her plate. My mother ladled gravy into a boat no one had asked for yet. My father nodded along through all of it, proud and glowing, and hungry for the version of our family that only worked if my sister stayed on top. Then, at last, he turned to me. "Still renting that condo of yours, Corinne?" My phone vibrated softly against the table. The screen lit for 1 second before fading. I looked down without touching it and thought, only once, if he reaches for the wrong thing even once, none of us are getting through this night as the people we were when we sat down. I kept my hands in my lap and let the question hang there, because the truth was, my father had been asking the wrong question for most of my adult life. When I was 26, I bought a duplex in Belmont with an FHA loan and more nerve than money. I moved into the left unit with 2 folding chairs, a mattress on the floor, and a toolbox I barely knew how to use. The right unit came with a tenant who paid on time, smoked on the back steps, and called me at 10:30 on my second night there because the garbage disposal had jammed and she had company coming in the morning. I stood under that sink in sweatpants with a flashlight between my teeth, turning a hex key with fingers so cramped I could barely feel them. I fixed it, went upstairs, and sat on the kitchen floor laughing because I had never felt poorer or more certain in my life. That was the first thing nobody in my family ever understood. I was never chasing the look of success. I was chasing something stronger than that. I wanted ownership, yes, but more than that, I wanted insulation. I wanted a life that didn't depend on anybody deciding I deserved it. I packed my lunch almost every day for years. Turkey sandwiches, apple slices, cheap Greek yogurt, coffee in a travel mug that leaked if I tilted it wrong. I skipped weekends in Asheville with friends. I skipped a wedding in Charleston because I had a water heater threatening to go out and no room in the budget for both a gift and an emergency plumber. One Saturday morning, I sat in my Subaru outside Home Depot with 2 cans of paint in the passenger seat, counting the cash left in my checking account and deciding whether saving $20 now was worth repainting the whole room in a year. I bought the better paint. That was how my life got built, not in big dramatic leaps, in small, stubborn choices nobody applauded. My first real lesson came 3 months after I closed on that duplex. My tenant paid late for the first time, and I spent 3 nights staring at the ceiling, trying to decide whether kindness mattered more than consistency. By the fourth morning, I understood something no motivational quote on earth ever teaches you. A lease is not unkind. A lease is what protects both people from whatever version of panic shows up next. I gave notice properly, kept my tone calm, and learned that boundaries feel harsh only to people who have never had to survive on them. By 29, I had enough equity and enough scar tissue to buy a fourplex just outside Plaza Midwood. That one scared me more than the duplex ever had. The numbers worked, but barely. Every spreadsheet I ran ended with the same conclusion. If one major thing broke too early, I was exposed. I signed anyway, then spent the next 18 months living like somebody who knew exactly how expensive one bad week could become. At 32, I bought a 6-unit building in Commonwealth and got punished for my confidence almost immediately. 2 tenants left within 6 weeks of each other. The roof over one stairwell developed a leak after a hard spring storm. Insurance covered less than I hoped, the contractor took longer than promised, and for the first time, I understood what it meant to carry not just debt, but momentum. When things are going well, ownership feels like freedom. When they are not, it feels like standing upright under a piano and pretending your knees are fine. Still, I kept going. In 2022, when I was 36, I bought the 12-unit in East Charlotte through Blue Hollow Residential LLC. By then, I had Harrison Blake handling the legal structure and a registered agent on file, because there comes a point where privacy stops being secrecy and starts being basic good judgment. Carter Vale Property Management took over the day-to-day side: leasing, renewals, maintenance tickets, ACH collection, tenant communication. I stayed in the owner lane. The reports came to me, the decisions stayed with me, and the rest moved through the system the way systems are supposed to move when they are built by adults. That mattered more than anybody in my family would ever know. The last time I tried telling them the truth was after the fourplex. I remember that dinner clearly because I had come in almost happy. Not proud in a loud way, just quietly lit from the inside. I waited until everyone had sat down and said, "I bought another building." My father looked up from his plate. "Who's backing you?" "Nobody. It's mine." He took a sip of iced tea and set the glass down like he was placing a verdict on the table. "Nobody does that alone, Corinne." My mother smiled the way she smiles when she wants discomfort to slide around her instead of through her. "Celeste has been looking at a property too. Tell them about the kitchen, honey." I said nothing after that. I carried plates into the kitchen, stood by the sink, and heard Celeste in the hallway talking to a cousin who had come in late. There's no way she pulled that off by herself. Somebody has to be floating her. It didn't hurt the way people assume those things hurt. It clarified. That was the night I drove home and made one clean decision. I would never hand this family another piece of my real life just to watch them turn it into a way of shrinking me. So, no, I never told them about Blue Hollow. I never told them when I bought the South End condo in 2019 either. I invited my mother over for lunch once after closing, and she canceled an hour beforehand because Celeste needed help picking stone for a kitchen remodel. I stood in my new dining room with grilled cheese sandwiches going cold on 2 plates and understood that my mother wasn't cruel. Cruel would have required intention. What she was loyal to whatever version of motherhood made her look most at peace in public. Celeste, for her part, wasn't stupid. That would have made her easier to dismiss. She knew finishes, colors, staging, camera angles, and exactly what to say to make my father glow. She could make a townhouse look expensive and a shaky deal sound visionary. What she did not know was how to sit still with ugly numbers and not panic. She did not know how to carry a building through a bad season without needing somebody to clap. Owen knew the difference, though. I had seen it in fragments for years. The way he looked down when my father called Celeste the only one in the family with a real head for assets. The way he once said, "Careful with the reset on that rate," and got cut off by Celeste before the sentence was finished. The way he exhaled when she used the words passive income like she was reciting a slogan she no longer believed. Then came 2023. My father got pushed out, the Matthews house went on the market, and my parents needed a place they could afford without admitting that afford had become a smaller number than either of them wanted to say aloud. Tessa Monroe at Carter Vale handled the application. Credit check, income verification, lease packet, standard review, standard approval. They qualified for Unit 4B in the East Charlotte building and moved in that fall with the old dining table, my mother's good serving dishes, and my father's certainty that the world still worked the way he said it did. No one told them the owner was me. Not because anything was hidden illegally, not because the records were fake, not because I was playing a game. Because in North Carolina, a tenant signs with the management company in front of them, pays through the portal they're given, and lives in the unit they can afford. If the property sits under an LLC with a registered agent and the owner is not trying to be seen, the owner stays where owners often stay, in the background. Every month since then, Carter Vale has sent me the owner summary. Every month, one line has read the same, Unit 4B. Mercer, Gideon, and Marjorie, Pate. And every month my father has sent rent to the woman he still thinks is drifting. Across the table, his question sat there between us, like he had just invented it. "Still renting that condo of yours, Corinne?" I picked up my fork, cut a piece of turkey, and finally looked at him. He loved that question because it let him arrange the room again. "Still renting that condo of yours, Corinne?" My father had been sending rent through the Carter Vale tenant portal on the 3rd of every month for 2 years, and somehow that had not softened him at all. If anything, it had made him louder. I had heard him say at church that grown adults ought to own something solid by the time they hit their late 30s. I had heard him tell a cousin at a cookout in July that renting was what people did when they still had not figured out discipline. Once, on a Sunday call with an uncle in South Carolina, he said, "Some people keep moving sideways because they never learn how to plant." He had said it while living in Unit 4B of a building owned by Blue Hollow Residential LLC, his rent clearing into an account I reviewed every month. So no, I did not flinch when he asked. I just took my time cutting the turkey and let the quiet spread long enough for everyone else to hear the shape of the room. The apartment felt warmer than it had when I walked in, not comfortable warm, crowded warm. The old Matthews dining table took up more space than the room wanted to give it, which I suspected was exactly why my father insisted on keeping it. He had lost the ranch, the garage, the yard, the illusion of permanence that came with a flag in the front and 30 years of mortgage payments behind him, but he still had the head of the table, and that seemed to matter almost as much. My mother moved around the room in short, efficient lines, refilling glasses that did not need refilling, straightening folded napkins that were already straight, wiping gravy from the counter as though neatness could prevent disaster. She had always done that. When tension rose, she reached for a dish towel. I knew more about her daily life than she realized. I knew the lobby door stuck worse when the temperature dropped below 40. I knew she had complained twice in October that the heat on the second floor took too long to come up in the mornings. I knew there had been a maintenance ticket for the hallway light outside 4B that got resolved one day later than standard because the vendor had mixed up ballast sizes. I knew all of that because the owner report hit my inbox every Friday, and Cartervale logged everything. One Tuesday in early November, Nora Kim had forwarded a short note from a tenant thanking management for handling a repair so quickly. The name at the bottom had been Marjorie Mercer. I had stared at it longer than I should have. My mother had never sat at my South End dining table, never asked what my numbers looked like, never wanted to see how I lived, but she was being buffered every single day by systems I paid for, approved, and maintained. Celeste reached for her wine and crossed one knee over the other, already polished back into form after my father's question. She had been in her element all evening, talking about an investor lunch in Uptown and a townhouse she and Owen were supposedly circling because it had upside. That was one of her favorite words. Upside, potential, vision. She loved nouns that sounded expensive and verbs that did not require receipts. My father nodded at her constantly. Every time he did, she seemed to brighten from the inside, like a lamp getting a fresh current. The thing about Celeste was that she was not stupid. Stupid would have made her easier to dismiss and much harder for my father to worship. She understood surface value better than anyone I knew. She could walk into a dated kitchen and point out exactly which cabinet color, faucet finish, and backsplash would make strangers think the house belonged to someone doing better than they were. She knew camera angles, listing descriptions, and the timing of a strategic pause. What she did not know, or maybe refused to know, was what happened after the photos. The rate reset, the reserve account, the carrying cost of a vacant month, the way one sloppy refinance could turn a pretty story into a hole in the ground. Owen knew those things. That was becoming harder to hide. By the time my father asked if I was still renting, Owen was halfway into his second whiskey. He did not drink like a man looking for fun. He drank like someone adding distance to a sentence he did not want to say too early. Earlier, while Celeste was talking about that townhouse, she had leaned toward my father and said, "The refinance is basically done, so once that closes, the rest is easy." Owen had lifted his eyes from his plate just long enough to say, "It is not exactly done." Celeste laughed before anyone else could process the correction. "You are always too cautious, babe." My father smiled at her, indulgent and proud. That is why she gets things moving. Owen had gone quiet after that. Not angry, just done in a way that sat under his skin like a fever. Across from me, Aunt Bertie had not missed any of it. She rarely interrupted, but she observed with the steadiness of someone who had spent 30 years reading children before they knew how to lie well. She had seen my mother reach for the gravy boat the moment my father shifted into lecture mode. She had seen Celeste's face sharpen whenever attention drifted away from her. She had seen me become smaller at that table for so many years that she could probably predict each movement before it happened. Uncle Thomas watched too, though he did it in a banker's way, quietly, like every expression had a number attached to it. My mother finally looked up from the stove. "Corrine, are you warm enough? It's drafty by that door." It was the sort of question that sounded caring to anyone who did not know us. "I'm fine." She nodded and adjusted the casserole spoon. Celeste reached for the cranberry dish and smiled toward my mother. "I still think you should let me talk to someone for you when this lease comes up. Maybe we can get you both into something a little better next year." My mother lowered her voice. Only if the rent goes up again. We're managing now. We'll figure it out, Mom. The words landed on the table like she had just volunteered to carry us all. My jaw tightened. The truly maddening part was not that she said it was that everyone in the room was accustomed to hearing her talk like that, as if she were the one holding the frame together, as if I were not the one sitting there with the actual building running through my phone. My father sliced another piece of turkey and kept conducting dinner according to the hierarchy in his head. Celeste first, always. Then Owen, though more as an extension of her than as himself. Then Bertie and Thomas, because older relatives deserved politeness. Me last, if at all. Every question he asked me carried the faint smell of evaluation, not curiosity, not warmth, inventory. How's work these days? Busy. Doing what exactly? Enough. My father leaned back, looking irritated by the fact that I was not helping him shape the scene. You always answer like someone under subpoena. Bertie took a sip of wine and set her glass down with care. Some people get used to being cross-examined. My father ignored her. My mother pretended not to hear it. Celeste reached for the rolls. For a few seconds, everyone moved at once, plates shifting, silverware touching china, football announcers rising faintly from the living room. It could have passed for ordinary if you did not know what ordinary cost in that family. Then my phone vibrated again. Not loud, just enough to make the stem of my water glass hum against the wood. The screen brightened before fading, and in that brief pulse I saw the top of the Cartervale summary and the line I already knew would be sitting near the middle. Unit 4B, Gideon and Marjorie Mercer. Paid. My father's eyes dropped to the table. At least have the decency to be present when people are speaking to you. I did not reach for the phone. I just lifted my eyes and looked at him. Owen watched me over the rim of his glass. Celeste's smile had thinned into something sharper. My mother froze with the gravy ladle in her hand. My father glanced at the phone once more, irritated now that he had noticed I was not reacting the way he expected. He mistook restraint for submission. He always had. I looked at him, then at Owen's whiskey, then at Celeste's face, bright and tight and a little too alert. Bertie had gone very still. Uncle Thomas lowered his fork without seeming to. In another room, the television crowd erupted over a touchdown none of us had seen. Everyone at that table was still sitting inside the shape of a normal Thanksgiving, a cramped apartment, too much food, old resentments dressed as conversation. They thought the evening could still be nudged back into place with enough denial and enough pie. But I could feel it. The room had already crossed the point where kindness could save it. My father reached across the table. His hand closed around my phone before anyone else moved. At least have the decency to be present when people are speaking to you. My father held the phone in his palm like he expected to find proof of distraction. Some ordinary little thing he could use to tighten the room back into the shape he liked. Then, because tonight he apparently intended to step on every weak floorboard in the house, he kept talking while he looked down at the screen. You are almost 40, Corinne. A woman your age should have something clear to point to when people ask what she has done with her life. Not a vague job, not a condo, not this constant halfway feeling. Your sister has built a portfolio. She understands assets. She understands how to hold value. Across from him, Celeste lowered her eyes just enough to look modest, which was one of her better tricks. My mother rose from her chair with 2 half-full plates in her hands and carried them to the kitchen, though nobody was finished eating. She set them down, picked up a dish towel, and began wiping a counter that was already clean. My father kept going. I have been thinking a lot lately about what matters long-term, about what should stay in responsible hands, and the truth is, some people are stable enough for that, and some are not. Celeste gets it. She has always gotten it. She knows what to do with property, with opportunity, with a future. You still seem to be figuring life out. No one spoke. Not Owen, who had gone completely still with one hand around his glass. Not Bertie, though I could feel her attention sharpen across the table. Not my mother, who was now wiping the same square foot of counter for the third time. Not Celeste, who let the words sit there because they had been feeding her for years. My father's thumb moved on the phone screen. Once, twice. At first, he was only half looking, I could tell. He expected to see a text thread, a calendar alert, maybe a work email. Something small, something I could be corrected for. Then his eyes narrowed. His thumb stopped. He scrolled back up. The room changed before anyone understood why. He read slower the second time. There was no dramatic sound, no dropped glass, no cinematic gasp, just the low mechanical breath of the HVAC, the tick of cooling metal from the kitchen stove, and the faint scrape of Thomas setting his fork down very carefully on his plate. My father's face lost color in stages, not all at once. First the forehead, then around the mouth, then the full stunned flattening of a man watching something in his mind fail to fit together. He looked up at me. "What is this?" His voice had changed. Not softer, just stripped, like the authority had been sanded off it in one pass. I did not reach for the phone. I did not stand. I did not rush to explain. "You tell me." He looked back down. The screen was still lit. Carter Vale Property Management, November Owner Collection Summary for Blue Hollow Residential LLC. A list of units. Status. Paid, paid, paid. And right there in the middle of it, the line that had lived quietly in my reports for 2 years. Unit 4B. Mercer, Gideon, and Marjorie. Paid. My mother took one step out of the kitchen and stopped. "Gideon?" He scrolled upward with the stiff, careful movement of someone handling evidence against himself. Blue Hollow Residential LLC at the top. Owner summary. Building address. The kind of information any adult who had ever signed a mortgage or read a settlement statement would understand without help. This doesn't mean anything. But he said it too fast, and the sentence collapsed under its own weight before it reached the far end of the table. Celeste leaned forward. "Dad." He did not answer her. I held his gaze and let him sit in it for one more second. He had spent most of my life asking questions he had already answered in his own head. Tonight, for the first time, he was the one holding something he could not explain away fast enough. My mother's dish towel slipped from her hand to the counter. She left it there. Bertie straightened in her chair. Thomas folded his hands. Owen set his whiskey down without drinking. I finally spoke. "Blue Hollow Residential LLC is my company. Carter Vale manages the buildings for me. This building is one of them." No one moved. "I bought it in 2022. Mom and Dad applied here in 2023. Same screening as everyone else, same lease process, same rent portal, same maintenance system. I did not handpick them. I did not give them a discount. I did not set them up. They are tenants in a building I own, and they pay market rent like every other tenant in that property." My father stared at me, still holding my phone. "That's impossible." "No, it's just inconvenient." Celeste found her voice first. "You've been sitting on this the whole time? You let them live here and say nothing? That's sick, Karen, that's controlling." I turned to her. "The building was mine before they moved in, Celeste. The LLC is standard. The management company is standard. Their application went through Carter Vale, not through me. I never interfered with their lease. I never raised their rent because they were my parents. I never lowered it either. I never used this to hurt them. Then why keep it secret?" I gave her the answer she had earned years ago. "Because the last time I shared the truth with this family, you told people somebody must be floating me." Her face flushed dark and hard. For one beat, she looked less polished, more like the girl I known when we were younger, the one who learned fast that if she smiled first, no one looked too closely behind the smile. My father still had not set the phone down. "How long?" "More than 10 years." "How many?" Enough that you should stop using the word renting like it means failure. My mother made a small sound then, the sound of someone realizing a room had been built around a lie so familiar she had mistaken it for furniture. Celeste pushed her chair back a few inches. This is insane. You sit there acting superior while spying on them through some management company? I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because even now she needed the story to bend toward her. I don't spy on my tenants. I review owner reports, the same way any landlord with a management company reviews owner reports. There it was again, that word, landlord. It landed on the table and stayed there. Celeste looked at Owen. Say something. Owen rubbed his jaw once, like he was buying himself one final second. What exactly would you like me to say? Anything. He looked at me, then at my father, then at the phone still in Gideon's hand. Maybe we should stop pretending Celeste is the one in this family who understands assets. The sentence hit harder because he did not raise his voice. Celeste stared at him. Excuse me? You heard me. My father blinked, thrown off the track he had lived on for so long that he did not know what to do when someone stepped in front of it. Owen leaned back in his chair and let the truth arrive without drama. The refinance you keep talking about is not basically done. It stalled weeks ago. The townhouse in South Cark is eating cash faster than you admit, and the only reason any of it looked stable at the beginning was because Carter pulled equity out of the Matthews house and handed you enough money to make the first round of decisions look smarter than they were. Celeste went white, then red. That is a temporary cash flow issue. Owen gave a short, tired shake of his head. No, it's what happens when you keep making everything look better than it is. Silence again, this time different. Not shock, recognition. A room full of people connecting pieces they should have questioned sooner. Bertie lifted her wine glass, not to drink from it, but just to hold something steady. Corrine never needed permission from anyone at this table to be more capable than the rest of us wanted to believe. My father turned toward her slowly, as if the betrayal of that sentence hurt him almost as much as the screen in his hand. Bertie held his stare without apology. My mother was crying now, quietly, no sobbing, no speech, no grand display, just tears on a face that had spent decades arranging itself around discomfort instead of through it. She did not defend him. She did not defend Celeste. For the first time in my life, she had no practical movement left to hide behind. My father finally set the phone down, very carefully, like it might still explode if he moved too fast. Why didn't you tell us? There it was. Not, I was wrong, not, I'm sorry. Why didn't you tell us? The question of a man who still thought the real injury might be that the truth had been withheld from him. I looked at him and felt something inside me go still. I did tell you once. That was enough to teach me what this table does with my truth. He dropped his eyes. No one tried to argue after that. There was nothing left sturdy enough to argue from. I stood up and smoothed the front of my sweater. Your lease does not change. Cartervale will keep handling the building exactly the way they always have. I am not going to use ownership to do what this family just did to me at dinner. My mother looked up. Corrine. I picked up the empty casserole dish from the counter. But this is the last Thanksgiving I come to as the person everyone here gets to talk down to and still call it family. Bertie reached for my wrist as I passed and squeezed once. Thomas gave me a look that felt, for him, almost like a standing ovation. Owen did not speak again. Celeste stared at the tablecloth as if she might find a version of the evening she could still survive inside it. My father sat at the head of the old Matthews table in an apartment he rented from the daughter he had just called unfinished, and for once in his life he had nothing useful to say. I walked out into the hall, down the length of the second floor, and through the lobby door that still needed a harder tug than it should have. The cold hit me clean when I stepped outside. The parking lot lights had come on while we were eating. My breath clouded once in front of me as I stood beside my Subaru with the casserole dish in both hands. I did not cry. I did not call anybody. I just stood there in the November air and felt the absence of something heavy. Not forgiveness, not peace, not yet, just the clean, strange lightness of finally putting down a weight I had carried so long it had started to feel like part of my body. By the time I got home, my phone had already lit up 3 times with Celeste's name. I set the casserole dish in the sink, took off my coat, and let the apartment settle around me before I listened to a single voicemail. The condo was warm in that quiet, honest way my parents' place never was. No television talking over the room, no silverware clinking like a warning, no one performing gratitude while keeping score under the table. Just the hum of the refrigerator, the distant rush of traffic from South Boulevard, and my own breathing finally sounding like mine again. The first voicemail came at 8:57. "Call me back. We need to talk about what happened tonight." The second came 20 minutes later, the polish already thinning. "Do you understand what you did to Dad in front of everybody?" The third landed at 9:41 and had no softness left in it. "This is not over." I listened to all 3, then set the phone face down on the coffee table and went to the kitchen for a glass of water. Celeste had not called to understand. She had called to reclaim the story before it belonged to the people who had witnessed it. At 10:12, Bertie called. This one I answered. "Honey?" Her voice carried that old teacher steadiness, the kind that can hold both kindness and truth in the same sentence without dropping either. "You all right?" I leaned against the counter and looked out at the city lights. "I am now. I heard him sit there for 40 minutes after you left, just sat there with both hands on that table. Your mother cleared everything herself. Celeste and Owen got into it in the parking lot, loud enough that Thomas had to walk one of the cousins out the sideway because she looked like she wanted the floor to open up." I closed my eyes for a moment. "That sounds about right." Bertie let a beat pass. "I always knew there was more to you than what your father said. I just should have said it louder and sooner." That landed harder than anything anyone had said all evening, not because it fixed something, it did not, but because it named it. The truth sounds different when somebody else finally says it out loud. "Thank you." "I mean it, Karen." "I know." After we hung up, I stood in the kitchen for a long time, looking at the empty dish rack and the clean line of the counters, thinking how strange it was that the first real peace I felt all day had come after a family dinner exploded. 3 days later, my father called. His voice was flatter than usual, stripped down past irritation into something more defensive. "Did somebody leave you money?" "No." "A man helping you?" "No." "A lucky deal?" I let the silence answer him for a second before I did. "I bought a duplex in Belmont in 2012, a fourplex in 2015, a 6-unit in Commonwealth in 2018, the East Charlotte building in 2022. I used owner-occupied financing when I could, refinanced when the timing made sense, rolled profit into reserves and down payments, and worked longer than anybody in this family ever asked me how I was working." He breathed once through his nose, the way he used to when he was reading something he hated agreeing with. "You should have told me." I had told him, just not in a language he respected back then. I tried once, that was enough. He did not apologize. Men like my father often mistake apology for surrender, and pride had always been the only inheritance he guarded more fiercely than furniture. He hung up a minute later without another word, and somehow that was more honest than a polished sorry would have been. The first week of December brought the rest of the collapse in pieces. One of Celeste's listings dropped in price, then dropped again. Owen stopped sleeping at the townhouse they had spent a year insisting was a smart hold. One of my cousins texted Bertie that Celeste had posted something late at night about seasons of stripping and rebuilding, and God redirecting what man cannot sustain. Bertie read it to me over the phone in a tone so dry I nearly smiled into my coffee. The refinance that was supposed to solve everything never solved anything. The mortgage on the Monroe property stayed behind. The image held for a while, because image always holds longer than it should, but not forever. My mother came the following Tuesday around 2 in the afternoon, carrying a plastic container of turkey soup in both hands, like it might justify the drive. I buzzed her in and watched her on the hallway camera straighten her coat before I opened the door. "I had extra," she said, as soon as she stepped inside. "Of course you did." She stood in my entryway and looked around in that careful, quiet way people do when they realize they have misjudged a place for years without seeing it. The dining table, the bookshelves with actual use in them, the framed prints over the couch, the brass lamp by the reading chair, the clean kitchen where nothing matched perfectly but everything belonged. "It's nice," she said, and then, after a pause, "This is nice. It's been mine for 6 years." She nodded once and followed me to the kitchen. I heated the soup while she sat at the table, folding and unfolding her hands in her lap. The apartment held her uncertainty more honestly than her own apartment ever had room to. I should have come sooner. That was all. No polished speech, no sudden revelation that she had always understood, just a sentence with too little in it and more truth than I had expected. I brought her a bowl and sat across from her. "You should have." She lowered her eyes. We ate in near silence, not hostile silence, just the kind that happens when two people finally stand in the room they should have been standing in years earlier, and there is no graceful way to make up the distance. She left after 40 minutes. At the door, she touched my arm. I didn't know how to do this right. "No," I said. "You didn't." Then she nodded and walked away. And for the first time in my life, I did not chase after my mother's discomfort to make it easier for her to carry. Elias came by that Saturday with a bottle of Barbera and a new bulb for the floor lamp in my bedroom I have been meaning to replace for a week. He kissed my temple, changed the bulb, poured wine, and never once asked for the dramatic version of the story. He listened when I wanted to talk and talked about old brick facades in Fourth Ward when I didn't. That is one of the quieter forms of love, I think. Not rescue, not repair, just the refusal to make someone perform their pain for you. In early January, Carter Vale sent through the invoice to replace the weather stripping and adjust the front lobby door at the East Charlotte building. I approved it in under a minute. The contractor finished on a gray Friday morning, and I stopped by after to walk the entry and make sure the seal was right. I had just tested the door when it opened cleanly from the inside, and my father stepped out with 2 grocery bags, one in each hand. He stopped when he saw me. I stepped back to hold the door. "Cold enough for you?" He looked at the hinges, the threshold, then at me. His face had changed in the weeks since Thanksgiving. Not softer, exactly, just less certain of the ground beneath it. "This is a well-kept building." For a second, I thought that was all he had. Then I realized that was everything he had. "Thank you." He nodded once and moved past me into the parking lot. That was the closest my father would ever come to applause. On the first Saturday after New Year's, I made sweet potato casserole again. Elias came early and opened the wine. Bertie brought paper napkins she insisted were nicer than they looked. Thomas carried in a bakery box and admitted up front he had bought the pie instead of pretending otherwise. The 4 of us sat around my table in Southend with nowhere to perform and nothing to prove. Halfway through dinner, my phone rang. My mother. I let it go to voicemail. A few minutes later, I listened. Her voice was tentative, smaller than I was used to hearing. "Maybe next time can be different?" I set the phone down and looked at the people in my kitchen. Bertie reaching for more casserole, Thomas wiping pie filling from his thumb with the corner of a napkin, Elias refilling my glass without asking, the lamp glowing in the corner, the city outside moving on schedule, indifferent and steady. "Maybe," I said to the room, though there was no one on the line to hear it now, "maybe next time is something people earn." Blue Hollow still ran. Cartervale still sent the reports. Rent still came in. Repairs still got approved. My life had not become valuable because my family finally stumbled into the truth. It had been valuable the whole time. Thanksgiving had not changed that. It had only changed who was forced to see it. The biggest thing I built was never the duplex, or the fourplex, or the 12-unit in East Charlotte. The biggest thing I built was a life where no one had to grant me dignity before I could live like I deserved it. If you have ever been the person a family talked over until one day they had no choice but to look you in the eye, I hope you know this. Quiet does not mean empty, and being underestimated is not the same as being small. If this story stayed with you, let me know where it touched you, and if you want to stay for the next one, I'll be here.